All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast. And for the fourth part of the show, we are now going to do our season overview on the San Francisco 49ers. I'm also going to talk about the moves that they have made so far, letting go of guys and also guys just leaving in free agency, and the impact of that. So similar to the Eagles. But the 49ers, so going into the year, I thought this team was going to be a lot better, as many other people did. I thought this team was going to win, I think, 12 to 13 games. But they dealt with a ton of injuries this year to everybody, basically. Whether it was on the defensive side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball, everywhere. I think even their kicker, right? I think even Jake Moody was hurt. But also when, in some of his games, he did not kick the ball well. But yeah, Brock Purdy missed some time late in the season. Christian McCaffrey was hurt basically the whole year, came back, and then ended up getting hurt in the snow game against Buffalo. And then he ended up being out the rest of the season, dealing with the Achilles injury. And then, Jordan Mason, who was his replacement, he was running the football well, was the leading rusher in the NFL early on in the season, one of the top leading rushers. He gets hurt. You had Isaac Guerendo. He also got hurt. Who was their other running back? Deebo Samuel was hurt. Brandon Ayuk tore his ACL. George Kittle missed some time. Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, you name it. Just everybody you could think of, for the most part, missed time. And you kind of got the sense that maybe this season was not going to go right with all the Brandon Ayuk stuff. Because I got to tell you, when I was doing the football podcast the whole summer, the spring into the summer, and just every day having to talk about, basically talking about Brandon Ayuk, I was getting tired of it. Because nothing was happening. You heard, they had a conversation. He showed up to practice. And they talked. And you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. When is he going to make a decision? When are they going to figure this out? Then they finally come to an agreement. And before he got hurt, he really wasn't playing that well. He ended up having no touchdowns on the year. He ended up finishing with 374 yards and 25 receptions. That's it. Didn't do that much. And, the rookie draft pick, Ricky Pearsall, he had the situation that happened with him where, he was recovering from a gunshot wound. So he didn't even start the year. You end up getting him back. And he had 3 touchdowns, 400 yards receiving. And you're hoping that, a full year now of training camp and preseason, if he plays, I'm assuming he would. You start the regular season. He's going to be a big part of this offense next year. So you had that happen as well. And then, throughout the season, like I said, a ton of injuries. Deebo Samuel, probably his worst year in the NFL. Missed some time due to injury. He had pneumonia at one point, but also he just looked like he was not the same player. Drops were a problem. Really was not making an impact on the game. And you had him going to social media and tweeting about his involvement in the game. The 49ers tried to get him the ball. Dropped that touchdown against the Rams late in the season. And now they ended up trading him to the Commanders. So he gets a fresh start there, and we'll see if he bounces back. George Kittle had a very good year. George Kittle ended up being their leading receiver. He had 1,106 receiving yards, 78 receptions. He had 8 touchdowns. He missed some time too, but he was very good. He was their most consistent weapon. Juwan Jennings, at times, was good. He fell a little bit short of 1,000 yards, 975 receiving yards. He did have 6 touchdowns. He had that monster game early on in the season against the Rams. He had 3 touchdowns in that game. He had 11 receptions for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. Brock Purdy, 3,800 yards passing, 20 touchdowns to 12 picks. Not as good of a year as 2023. And like I said, Jordan Mason ended up finishing as our leading rusher, 789 yards and 3 touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey, when he came back, he finished with 202 rushing yards and 146 receiving yards, but he had no touchdowns. And you're hoping that he comes back and he's healthy next year. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Fred Warner was probably their best player, and he was playing hurt. 131 total tackles, 1 sack, 4 forced fumbles. It's a tongue twister there. And he had a pick 6 as well against the Patriots. But, yeah, and Jake Moody, 24 of 34 on field goals for about 70%. That's not good. He's got to be better there. And then he was 32 of 33 on extra points. He was 6 of 11 on field goals that were between 40 and 49 yards. And then he was 4 for 9 on 50-plus field goals. 50-plus yard field goals. It's not good. And for the Niners, last place in the NFC West. You would not think that was going to happen going into the year. And against the division, they were not great. I think they only won one divisional game. They ended up winning only one divisional game, and that was against the Seahawks in Week 6 on that Thursday night. They beat the Jets in Week 1. Then you lose in Minnesota, and they've had a problem winning in Minnesota the last couple of years. And I actually, took the Vikings with the points in that game, but I still thought the Niners would win. They ended up losing. Then they lost to the Rams. That was a game that they should have won. The Rams scored 13 points in the fourth quarter, and they ended up winning 27-24. And they didn't have Kupp or Nakua in that game. Now, the 49ers were also missing a ton of guys, too. But the 49ers should have won that game. They beat up on the Patriots. They lose to the Cardinals late. They lost the Super Bowl rematch to the Chiefs. So going into the bye week, they had the bye week Week 9. They were going in at 3-4. So, and we've seen the 49ers in years past where they start off slow, but then, they have a second half run in them. And you thought once they got McCaffrey back, that was going to be the case. But yeah, so they beat Tampa, and then they proceed to lose their next 3 games. They lose at home against the Seahawks in the final seconds when Geno Smith scrambled for that touchdown. Also, Nick Bosa got hurt in that game. But then Brock Purdy ends up missing the next game against the Packers in Lamb. I don't think it really would have made much of a difference, but they didn't have him. They were missing a lot of guys. I don't think Trent Williams played. They didn't have Purdy. They didn't have Nick Bosa. They were missing a lot of guys, and the Packers won 38-10. You had Brandon Allen starting. They won 38-10. And then the following week, McCaffrey gets hurt, and they lose 35-10 to the Bills in Buffalo. Josh Allen, scores 2 touchdowns on one play. A passing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. But then they bounce back. They beat up on the Bears 38-13, and you think, all right, maybe with their backs against the wall, they got a run in them. That didn't happen. They end up losing that ugly game on that Thursday night against the Rams, 12-6. Debo drops that touchdown. There was not a single touchdown in that game. Then they lose to the Dolphins. And then, they lose the NFC Championship game rematch with the Lions. And the 49ers, their offense was good in that game, but it didn't matter. They could not stop the Lions. Ricky Pearsall actually had a good game. 8 receptions for 141 yards and a touchdown. But then Purdy got hurt in that game. He ended up not playing in the final game of the regular season, and the Cardinals beat them up 47-24. Josh Dobbs, he started that game. And yeah, so they finished 6-11. And now, going into this offseason, this is what's gone on so far. So they traded Deebo Samuel to the Commanders. And then they also recently cut Kyle Juszczyk. You saw a couple of offensive linemen leave in free agency. Jalen Moore, who was the backup to Trent Williams, he went to the Chiefs. Elijah Mitchell also went to the Chiefs. Aaron Banks went to the Packers, a guard. But you also saw in the secondary and in the defense in general, you saw Charvarius Ward go to the Colts. Wanted a change of scenery. He left and went there. You also saw Ufanga and Dre Greenlaw. They both went to the Broncos. So they lost those guys. And like I said, they cut Kyle Juszczyk. Josh Dobbs signed with the Patriots, but, backup quarterback. They could find someone to replace him. So the 49ers are going to look different. Now, I think similar to the Eagles, when you look at a lot of these guys that left, Deebo Samuel, I think it was okay with trading him. Now, who knows what they're going to do with Brandon Ayuk? Because they could trade him. But you got Ayuk, you got Pearsall, you got Jennings, you got George Kittle. I think they're still okay at receiver. Maybe they draft one. You hope that Christian McCaffrey comes back. Elijah Mitchell did not play at all last year. The 49ers have a ton of running backs. You hope Christian McCaffrey is healthy next year. But I don't worry about that. Like I said, Josh Dobbs, backup quarterback. I do think, though, even though these guys were hurt last year, Dre Greenlaw came back late in the season. You kind of figured the 49ers were going to move off of him. Another move that they made, they also cut Leonard Floyd, too. And, he was one of their top guys when it came to sacks last year. I think he had 8.5 sacks last year. So there's that. But I think they'll be able to replace him, right? Yeah, he had 8.5 sacks last season. And then you got Nick Bosa, who had 9. But actually also Malik Collins is another guy that left as well. But yeah, the 49ers are going to look a little different next year. I do think some of these guys they will be able to replace. The secondary is definitely going to need some work. Maybe that's a position that they address is corner. But on top of that, you also have to deal with the Brock Purdy contract extension. That's coming. And we're going to see what Brock Purdy is made of with, this team not being the same as it was a couple years ago. You still have your weapons. You got to hope that they stay healthy. But yeah, the 49ers are not going to be that same team going into 2025 that we've been accustomed to seeing. Are they going to be able to bounce back? I think they can. But I think right now the Rams are the best team. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if they can bounce back. But this is a big year for them. And we'll see if they can overcome last year's struggles and injuries. So we are going to take our final break of the show now. And then when we come back, we're going to talk some baseball. We're going to talk about the Yankees losing Garrett Cole for the year. And really for the next year and a half. Sorry about that. So for one final time today, make sure to stick around. And we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast.